Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Books, Girls, and Purrs. My name's Leslie and you're in my spoiler corner. Now before I get started, I think I'm going to go on a little preamble and just say that before I read this, actually after I read this book the first time, I felt good. I'm saying that because what I'm trying to say is like I didn't necessarily cry the whole time I read it. I just like took it in. And this past weekend, I took off to a cafe with my daughter and I started to just write in all my notes to figure out how I would talk about the book. And I was going over my notes and then I like could not stop crying. So I don't know what that means about reading the book, if it's going to make you cry or not. Not necessarily that's a meter to read it, but I'm more pre-warning you. If this is choppy, maybe I'm just crying in between. I don't know. So yeah, I just felt like maybe if I just say that out loud, I'll be okay. All right. So if you didn't watch my quick review, I'll just say that this is a memoir by Brandon K. Goodman. They use pronouns he, they, so I'll probably be switching between the two of them. It's a nonfiction memoir. This is by Legacy Lit, an imprint of Hatchet Books. This was published 2 years ago in 2022. Right around the height of the pandemic is probably around the time the author was, writer was offered the book deal. During the pandemic on Instagram and on YouTube, Goodman would have conversations with other people about Goodman's experience or other people's experience, or create a bridge with other people. When I say bridge, for instance, like maybe someone's white and Goodman is black, so he wanted to create like a safe space to just talk about things and outreach to each other in a way that both parties felt comfortable in. And it was therapeutic for both parties involved, but also for the audience. And I definitely watched during that time. And I wasn't really aware of the fact that Goodman is a writer for Big Mouth. I don't watch it. It's like a cartoon. It's like an adult cartoon or whatnot. And there's like a spin-off of that, of something that I think Goodman helms, but I haven't seen it. Yeah, so my introduction to the author is mostly Instagram, the Messy Mondays. Every Monday, most every Mondays, in their stories, he'll have segments where people could ask questions, and it's basically a safe space for people to talk about relationships or sex health. And it's a lot of fun. It's very funny. There's a lot of giggles, but there's also plenty of serious times, and there's definitely some really educational moments. And so if you're interested in that, I'd say please watch. I love Brandon K. Goodman. And in fact, I did have at some point, maybe last year or the year before, I don't know what time it is anymore, when I bought this book, I kind of like did a book haul, and I was kind of embarrassed after because I think I was just so overwhelmingly excited to purchase this book that I know the author's name is Brendan, but I started calling them Kyle because that's our middle name, and I just like got stuck on the name Kyle the whole entire time. Anyways, I'm going on off another tangent. I guess I'm just a huge fan and have a lot of love for this artist. So with that said, I'm going to talk about this book. It's going to be a little bit all over the place. I'm definitely going to have to resort to my notes. Something that I really appreciate about this book is that it's written in a non-linear way. And the author writes each section by a particular subject with great intent. Intent is something that's so important to the author. How they move through the world. And so something that the author does is he makes it clear that they don't have all the answers. And they lead through empathy throughout the book. For instance, even in their introduction, the author makes it pretty clear that no one in the narrative that they are creating is a villain, and that they have so much of a capacity for love for the people that he's had to set boundaries around for his own mental health and safety. And you know what? That really brings me back to my days of watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Whenever I come across people like that are just so kind and have such a large capacity for love and empathy, my heart just grows more for them. And so that's how I view Goodman. So I'll say that. So in chapter 2, the author discusses in adulthood becoming a writer, incrementally creating a found family in a way through their professional life. Not quite at the point where they're accepting themselves as non-binary. So much of this book is about not necessarily the author accepting themselves, but the time in their life where they didn't, and how other people saw Bryan for who they really were, even if they couldn't accept that from themselves. And just that idea of unconditional love and realizing that they had a lot of work to do about themselves. And furthermore, that through character, whether the author was writing or was an actor in a play, in a movie, it's through, I think the chance to be someone else that they were able to connect and have revelations about themselves. So if Brandon played a character that is gay but maybe wears heels, is just living their life beyond what the conventions of society says they should do, is when Brandon would have these epiphanies, or realizing how much of themselves that they were denying, or if society hadn't gotten their hands on them, that character is really who they would be. And it was just this really beautiful revelations and just incredibly vulnerable moments. And I also appreciated that every time this happens in the book, there's been so many times when they had such a support system that just accepted them and didn't push back. That wasn't really true for maybe blood relatives, but that was definitely true for their found family that they cultivated over time in New York. And speaking of New York, the author does talk about moving to New York and how some people may assume that because Bryan was in New York that there would be a level of liberation that they felt finding other people in the queer community. But that's when the nuances and intersectionality comes in between, yes, they're a gay person, but they're still Black. And there's a couple of things going on, right? There's racism within the queer community. So there's still, just because someone's queer doesn't mean that they're not racist. And then also on the flip side of that, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. The author says it better. But they're just saying how because of generational trauma and enslavement and dehumanization of people because of enslavement in the States, there's this idea of chipping away at a Black man's manhood to dehumanize them. And so being queer, it's not just about someone not within his own Black community that doesn't like people being queer, but it's more because some people perceive that as an affront to being a Black man, or how white supremacy plays a part on instead of here's someone being queer, here's someone being a black man, but over here, like way over here, is like white supremacy trying to say like what a black man isn't, I guess I'm trying to say. And so that will come in forms of saying what they're not. And so you have these like straight cis black community and then white supremacy, and then you bunch that up and they meet in the middle. And so someone like Goodman existing is like on one side like reinforcing white supremacy, I guess, complex in a way that they'll hold a black person down, and on the other side is the black cis straight community feeling like, no, you're just like fulfilling something that we're trying to get away from, I guess. And so it was just written in such a complex way. I'm sorry, my camera's shaking. It's my cat. My cat is tearing up my couch. Anyways. So I always appreciate the nuances to Goodman saying that, because they're not just saying like, oh, some people in my community will like not accept me. Goodman sees how that happened, how society plays a part, and he's not really like placing blame on his community. He's actually just bringing up the fact how much white supremacy complex is part of the problem, how it permeates in all these different facets. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and bring up me being at the cafe. As I was writing my notes, I was pondering on how Goodman says that it's actually therapeutic in a way, all these moments where he had an epiphany through art. And that reminded me of Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind, which I just brought up not too long ago. I'm going to keep bringing it up. Thiong'o brings up theater. He's a writer. He's written plays. He's been put in prison in Kenya for writing a play that was about not just writing in their indigenous language of their variety of communities within Kenya, but also writing a story that is really about a woman's liberation. I bring that up because the author brings up the colonial space, how the land just existed, and then colonialism and capitalism, which is to me the same thing, comes in and then commodifies the land, commodifies the people, and then takes away the space, right, to capitalize on it. And I'm bringing that up because what he writes so eloquently is that creating theater in indigenous languages is actually reclaiming the space, reclaiming the languages, and also I almost felt like reclaiming the self and community. And so I was reflecting on that while I was reading Goodman's work, and I think I felt this overwhelming sadness, not for him as an adult, he's fine, you know, I mean, I have so much admiration for this person, but I was thinking about the childhood self and all the ways that people within his own community made it clear that they couldn't exist, and they just kept having to like push themselves down, like, let me just keep folding into myself. And once again, that's all a symptom of the white supremacy complex and people wanting him to be a man, be a man. And I just wish that little boy had like maybe theater from a younger age. But yeah, I'll get into that more later, but I love that. And with that said, like towards the end of chapter 2 and then the beginning of chapter 3 is about the author coming out, but in two different ways. The end of chapter 2 is the author becoming just physically affected to the point of like physical illness. So the author had to come out. Like they couldn't hold it in anymore because they've been, like I said, they just been folding themselves in for so long that they had to just accept themselves in order to be free and also be healthy. And also, like chapter 3, then there's this like continuation of coming out but as non-binary, I believe during the pandemic, and doing research, because the author is an activist and does create like calls to action in a way, but in a way that I really feel like connects with people, because it feels almost like a emotional and psychological call to action, if that makes any sense. And so he would, during the pandemic, he would say like, why don't you read more books, or how about you do more research to learn about people you don't know. And since Goodman is someone that feels like just because he says something, he also needs to do the work. So he started researching online about their own queer community, that just because they're queer doesn't mean that they know suddenly everything about the queer community. And through that research, seeing all the different elements, I guess you could say, of being non-binary, and realizing everything that they had went through in childhood and throughout life, really added up to them being non-binary and not realizing it until they did that research. And they're married by then, and their husband accepted them. And I think that's another example of seeing that over time, they really learn to seek out people that accept them unconditionally, just as much as Goodman accepts others unconditionally. And I thought that was really beautiful. But also, I feel like, I don't know how to say this because it sounds like self-serving, but I just think it's so important not just to do research or read about other people just to do it, because yes, it is important to stay active and keep one knowledgeable, but also, like, beyond that, you will learn so much about like yourself, like Goodman did. Goodman realized something about themselves that if they hadn't done that research, they would have never known, or who knows how they would have begun to possibly like fold into themselves more. And it really just chalks up to like being able to narrow and like point out what the problem is in order to find a solution. And that can't be done unless there's this excavation of the self and society. And so I feel like he really embodies that really beautifully, and I just love that. All right, with all that said, the book toggles between like the author's experiences being queer, non-binary, and also dealing with like racial dynamics. But what the author does, which is really vulnerable, is not just talk about, how do I say this? Racism in this, I don't know how to say it. It's not just about like how people treat Brendan, but also, unfortunately, what like white supremacist narratives they ingested, which it's not their fault, it's society's fault, but how he agreed with some like really terrible things that was affecting their mental health, that was affecting their ability to have self-respect. And I really like commend their vulnerability. So I would rather just like read a little segment so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Brendan was in an abusive relationship, went to therapy, and decided to in these sessions just be really like brutally honest. And so the author's in the therapy session. And so Brendan says they're in like therapy, talking, and that the therapist brought up about their fears of being alone. And Brendan said, oh, no, I'm sorry. The therapist said, but you're charming and attractive young man. She said, what makes you think you'll never find love again? And the author says, no matter how attractive someone might think I am, I'll never be as attractive as a white man. The author goes on to narrate that he was deeply in love with a very special boy, and that he was deeply in love with his proximity to that white privilege, which was like a gray space. And how basically the author had to dismantle that and realize that clearly none of that is true, but they had to learn that for themselves in therapy in order to be able to be in the relationship and foster a relationship that they are in now with their now husband. And I thought that was like really powerful. First of all, yes, because that's rooted in white supremacy complex, but also that creates like a codependence, and also like fosters a really abusive relationship, right? And yeah, there was just so many things that were like revelations in this book that was just like really hard to read. But I do feel like I'm glad the author wrote this. I don't know. It's a lot. All right, so in chapter 7, Goodman writes about his strained relationship with his mom. They don't have any contact with their mom at this moment. And this is where Goodman's empathy and unconditional love comes in, because this is basically what he's talking about in the introduction about not treating the other people in his life as a villain. They're just moving through the world with the tools that they have. And I thought that was a really beautiful, beautiful perspective. And so to understand that, the author tells us more about those people's lives. For instance, I'm trying to say how to, Brandon's grandmother on the maternal side is from Trinidad. And so they came over to the United States and established a life here. And when their grandma passed away, his mom became a born-again Christian, very devout. And in doing so, this is around the time that she now knows that Brendan is gay, and really just tried to make it clear through all their interactions that Brendan being queer is a problem. And it just got to the point where Brendan kept like creating like gentle boundaries here and there, but they just constantly weren't respected to the point where Brendan had to just cut ties altogether, just to preserve their mental health. And what I love about this section is that this isn't something where the author now feels liberated from cutting that cord. It's quite the opposite. It's like this author grew up being raised by essentially a single mom, and loving her and their grandma so much that they were like their whole world. And so it's a painful experience, but it has to happen in order for them to preserve their mental health in other ways. And I feel like sometimes that doesn't get talked about as much, that just because you love someone, just because you have to create a boundary or not have them in your life, doesn't mean that you stop loving them. And also doesn't mean that it's a good thing to try to like reconnect, right? Because a person can only have control themselves. They can't really control what someone else decides to do, nor would we want to, right? It's more about establishing a boundary for mental health, and all those nuances, all those like complex feelings. I just really appreciated the author talking about, because I know there's so many people that find themselves in a position to have to do that, and it just feels nice, like, to be seen, I guess. Chapter 8, and I also want to say chapter 6 are like short chapters where the author outlines something like for chapter 8, the author will discuss tips for boundaries and stages. And so in the book, this is where those self-help moments come in a way that works for me. I'm not really big on self-help books, I'm sure. I mean, it's just getting knowledge, so I should be okay with it. There's something I always have an issue with where they feel a bit didactic. But when Goodman weaves these moments into his memoir, it doesn't feel that way. It just feels like someone using outreach. I feel like this is where the tools of Brendan as a activist come in, and someone, again, with an abundance of love comes in. And so I appreciate that the author outlines this in a way where they're just saying, like, hey, from my experiences, this is what I've had to figure out. And I think that gentle approach really works for me and makes me feel like we're meeting, right? Just like he did in his YouTube and Instagram segments, where he would like create segments where he's like, this is a bridge for us to meet. That's how these segments feel like in the book, and I absolutely love them, and I just gobbled those sections up. And so then, because the author kind of uses, he uses like those author notes, almost like a preface to whatever the chapter is that they're gonna tackle. And so then the author did outline in a more like explicit way the emotional abuse that they experienced in a relationship. Like we hear the author kind of like mention this person and what set them going into therapy, not just about them being queer, but how they let themselves being treated in a relationship. Not that it's their fault, but more like trying to understand the patterns and the lack of self-confidence, and how racism played a role in what the author was willing to accept. And so the author just details like the downward spiral they found themselves going down through behavior that they had accepted, unfortunately. And then that leads into the next chapter, which is Make It Home. And sometimes the author will pose something as like a solution, but just say like that solution could also be problematic through nuance. And I appreciated the author saying that. Like, for instance, the author talks about clothing and style and how maybe how they presented themselves. And I think that's what the author's really getting at, is how living in a racist society, living in a bigoted society against queer people, there was a performance that they were putting on, but it was clearly done for survival. And so the author reflects on the murder of Tamir Rice, and how even in their own lives, they had situations where they had to perform in a moment that if anyone or anyone like me walked into the store, I wouldn't have to think about, I could just go into the store and buy something and leave. As where Brandon may walk into a store and feel like the vibes are off and then have to perform. Like, okay, let me do my song and dance that society is making me do to diffuse like a racist situation just to survive going to the store. And I felt like that is all entangled with the performance he's had to do his whole life. And then in chapter 11, The Gorgeous Swan You Are is just like also like an extension of also some self-help. I'm not going to discuss everything that's in there, but just like how choosing a therapist is like dating, and that you just have to find the right one for you. And so there's definitely some tips about finding a therapist, but also like what kind of questions could you ask a therapist. I wish I could tell you the name of the book. There's another book that I read that's really short and very powerful, but a little bit traumatizing for me, that talks about like the Latinx experience and therapy, and in the ways that like sometimes for a person, depending on like their cultural background, or also like being a person of color, someone will go to a therapy session and realize that person isn't like the right therapist for them. But also it's because the colonial mindset, because of racism, that person is going to have to like really actively seek out therapists that can really understand their experience moving through the world, instead of like creating more harm than being helpful. If I could think of the book, I know it's really thin. I'll put it below, but make sure you look up the trigger warnings for that book, because that book's very like daunting. And then I'll talk briefly about chapter 12, and then we'll stop here. Chapter 12 is Pride and Joy. And the author does talk about their love for Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson from a young age, so it's kind of like having a crush, but before Brandon really knew what was going on with themselves or could identify it. And I love that. I don't know if the author has met The Rock since then, but I am going to Google it later because I want to know if they ever met, because that would be incredible. That's all I think about. Oh, there's one other thing. I am going to read from the book. Something in chapter 12. Alright, in chapter 12, Brandon talks about pride and joy, self-acceptance, and also reflecting on ancestors. And I found this passage really moving, so I thought I'd read it to you. So it's page 180. The author writes, "Juliana and Alexander had 7 children, and my grandmother, Virginia, was the 6th born. I don't think Juliana or Alexander had the space to dream about a great-grandchild, and I can't imagine they ever dreamed of one like me. I wonder if they would marvel at my willingness to abandon the world's expectations of me, or if they'd be disappointed that I didn't honor tradition. I wonder what Juliana wanted, and if Alexander was it. I wonder what Alexander wanted, and if Juliana was it. I don't question whether or not they were great parents, or even great spouses, but were they ever given the space to ask themselves, what do I want? And if they had the awareness to ask that question, the space to ask that question, was there a world in which they could actually pursue their dreams?" And so I found that moving. I'm very proud of myself that I didn't cry during that part. And I think that really speaks to like the expansive, beautiful nature of Brandon's heart. And I love that they're just constantly on this ever-evolving journey to learn. Those are the people that I gravitate towards. And so yeah, I love this. Please read it. 5 prayers all the way, you already know. So here's the deal. I read this, but as I was reading this and realized that Goodman's family, through the maternal side, came from Trinidad, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make this a longer video. I'm not just going to just review, what do you call it, spoiler chat one book. I'm also going to then, so I'm going to get it. After this, talk about Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendez, because Paul Mendez' family is Jamaican. So the author of this is Jamaican British, And the story is about a family from Jamaica coming to Britain. And so I just feel like some of what's going on in this book is in conversation with Brandon's memoir. And so I thought that would be interesting to reflect on the non-fiction memoir experience of Brandon and the I guess what they divulge about their family versus the fictional narrative that Paul Mendez uses that is most likely a little bit involving their real life experiences. But I'll have more to talk about that once I read it. Actually, I did start reading this. I was dual reading this along with the audiobook. The audiobook is amazing. The way that the author, because they do the narration, switch from different characters and accents is incredible. Like, I don't know if they won any awards for the audiobook, but they should have. Here's the thing. I'll be honest. Let's say when I was in my earlier years, I had such a great ear for hearing English from people that are bilingual. So if they had like, when someone like, you could tell that they're bilingual. So maybe like certain consonants aren't accentuated and such. I was always good at that. But in my older years, once I hit like 35, I really lost that skill. And so since there are thick, nuanced accents in the narration of the audiobook, I was having a little bit of a issue digesting it along with this, which is shocking. I thought I would be just fine, but it started to get in the way of me taking in what was going on, and I found myself getting distracted because of that. So if you like audiobooks, still listen to it, please, because it's so good. But I think I just need to read the book on its own first. And I'm still going to go listen to audio because it's really good. And I wish I had that skill still, but I don't. So yeah, so this is kind of like a little more like a vlog style, I guess. Can you see my cat? Oh, my cat's bum right there, sorry. So yeah, I tore up a couch cushion. I moved it to do this, to make this work. It's been very rainy in my area, and I live in California, so Southern California, so that's pretty rare for us. So I'm enjoying it, but it's cold. The light's not great right here, but I try to make it work. Thank you for listening. If you've read Brennan's memoir, let me know what you think, because I love this so much. And I'm just glad that they found a path to express themselves. Additionally, I know I'm supposed to be wrapping this up, but I think that also this is such a great example of why art is so important. And so, to kind of riff on that for a minute, my daughter's always gone to public school. I would never be able to afford private school, but she's been very lucky that where I live, in case you're from somewhere else, there's like a lottery system. Like if you don't go to the school that you're assigned in a public school, you could try for other places and you get put in a lottery system. So you getting in is like random. And so my daughter's been very lucky where she was able to get into a middle school that had like a music program. And so because of that, she found out she even liked to play music in the first place. And so now she goes to the high school that's also public, same thing. There's no merit system. She just got in on like the lottery system. And I just see that she's someone, and all the other kids, by the way, get to really like express themselves and through their art kind of get to evolve and get to know themselves better. And like, I don't know, I just wish more schools had that access. I'm in the States, so the access to arts gets removed and the budgets keep getting cut. Teachers aren't paid enough, and I don't know, the government and administration don't see like the importance of art. And I think that that's something else that Goodman's book does so well, is just show that because they had an opportunity to express themselves in an artistic way, they were able to dismantle these really hurtful and harmful practices and ideologies. And yeah, I just think that's so important, and I wish more schools had that. I also see like the experience that my daughter is having, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know which way was up or down, and I didn't have access to the arts in this public school that I was at. And I often think, not about myself, but other people in my life that I found to be very talented or just like, I don't know, smart, and maybe what they could have done if maybe they had the like more options to express themselves early on. I don't know. This book just really like had me all over the place. And yeah, so I'll stop talking. All right, next up, Rainbow Milk. All right, everyone, we're back. I finished Rainbow Milk. I did take notes, and usually before I make a video, I try to like overview my notes, but I just feel like I just want to get into it, so hopefully this isn't too chaotic. Where do I start? I'm gonna go back and talk about the audiobook again. So at the beginning of the book, when I was reading the audiobook that was narrated by Paul Mendez, he does an incredible job. He has a real knack for voice and character. And I found out later that this is something that Paul Mendez has done before, that they've narrated other material, so that really shines through. The beginning narrative takes place in the 1950s with the character Norman, and there's quite a bit of patois that's used, and so I think that was like a little bit of a adjustment for me. But as time passed and I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere, I did read the beginning chunk from Norman's point of view on my own, and once the story got to Jesse's point of view, a character in the early 2000s, that's when I switched back to audio and dual reading, and then I was good. So in case anybody's interested in listening to the audiobook, I'd say do it. It's worth it. I love the author's voice. He has a very unique, like thick sounding, a little bit almost froggy, but it's very specific, and I really enjoyed their voice. All right, so I'm trying to figure out where to start. So when I read the first chunk, hold on. I think this is broken up into 4 parts, and it's the 4 parts that it's broken up into is divided by different areas that people live in. So the first one is Swan Village. The next one is the Great Bridge. And I hope I didn't skip one. Earl's Court and Bruce Grove. Something that I enjoyed about this book is while I was reading it, because I can't help myself, if there's something I'm not familiar with, location-wise, I tend to look it up. And this book was filled with this because this is so specific to taking place in London. And some of the language that's used to describe things. And there's a lot of music that's referenced throughout. Whether we're in the late 1950s following Norman's character, or we're in the 2000s following Jesse McCarthy's character. And I enjoyed Jesse McCarthy's section because there was just a lot of nostalgia for me, hearing this character talk about the music that they love and how that made a connection for them. So when I originally read this, I thought we were gonna toggle between Norman's character and Jesse McCarthy's character the whole time, and that doesn't happen. But that's my fault for just like assuming, because when I read on the back, it does mention both characters. So I thought there's going to be like this switch back and forth. That really doesn't happen. The life of Norman is kind of like used as a bookend. So at the beginning and then at the very end. So we follow Jesse. They are a Jehovah's Witness. They've been raised that way. Their mother marries a white man, and so the male figure that Jesse had in their life was a white man. And I kind of had the feeling that in their congregation, there's black people are like the minority. And so there's something that Jesse's character goes throughout the book. And that's feeling like they don't fit in, but it's not like it's not their fault. It's society's fault for making them feel like they're either too black or not black enough. And so there's just this like quota to fill that they just can never quite get right. And that's how that really talks to like racism and the pressures of society, how someone is put in a position to have to perform their culture. And that really like touched me, and I appreciated the author talking about that in such a beautiful and personal way. So at some point early on, Jesse gets outed about being gay, and since they're a Jehovah's Witness, which I'm not really familiar with, there's like this, what do you call it? This cutting ties with Jesse out of the community. So they're really forced to start a life in London. And early on, you just get the idea that as Jesse tries to find work and turns to prostitution, it doesn't really stem from needing money. We clearly see that this is a character that's just trying to connect, wants to be loved, wants to be accepted for themselves without someone fetishizing them or telling them that they're not enough. And unfortunately, those are elements that the character continues to run up against as far as how they're treated, but they're so starved for connection that they keep lowering themselves just due to low self-esteem, again just like constructed by society to make them feel like, well, this is all I could get, this is all I deserve. And his admiration, and it seems like sometimes is like in proximity to whiteness. And so I am glad that I read this book right after You Gotta Be You, because there's so many connections between this nonfiction memoir by Brandon K. Goodman and the experience of this fictional character, because there's plenty of these experiences that are like, I guess like on the emotional part of it, are very much connected to the author's real life experience. And so with that said, I'm trying to think about what else I could talk about. I'm gonna look at my notes. Hold on. Okay, so early on, I'm gonna go back to the character Norman. Norman comes to England, the British area, and is trying to start a life, is very jarred by the experience of being in an area full of soot, just like it's not very sanitary. They really thought they were gonna come to a land of opportunity, and the area was gonna look a certain way, and it was very disappointing. And there are times when, because Norman is also very tall but also black, that they have to kind of like perform around white people, and that there's like a scene where the character really has to do that, has to put on a smile, just be extra friendly to the people that are on edge just with their existence. And I think that's also something else that both characters go through that had me thinking about what Goodman talked in his memoir, as far as needing to perform in order to keep themselves safe. And so that's something that happens throughout these two characters on two different timelines. So in Norman's life, as they go on and they actually do find opportunity for themselves because they have gardening skills, and so they start to try to carve out a better life for themselves. But even then, that life isn't accepted. It's begrudged by white supremacists. So they find them in a situation where their lives are in danger, and so him and his family are uprooted, have to quit that job and seek safety somewhere else, and then takes up a life of boxing. So that was unfortunate to see that someone leaves their homeland by choice, thinking that they're going to find a better way of life, and then instead they just find themselves in a struggle the whole time. And even though they have the skills to elevate themselves to potentially another like financial class, that gets stripped away from them, just in the name of them trying to hold on to their safety because of racism. So I appreciate the author talking about that. Oh, okay. So I did want to talk about something that went over my head. When I read the beginning of Jesse's life, they mentioned that they're adopted by their dad. So I think I assumed that they were just adopted overall, and so Jesse's mom is quite cruel to him, and I couldn't figure out what is it. Is it I couldn't really find out the dynamic, and so for a while I thought that the mother was also an adoptive parent as well, but it turns out they're not. That Jesse's mother is their biological mother, but that they deal with a lot of internalized racism. And I suppose the racism part comes across quite strongly, and at times I was trying to figure out if the mother was a biological mother. At some point I felt like he made it clear, but I was still questioning it, and I think because of all the internalized racism. And that brings me to the title of the book, which is the mom just becomes like really cruel at times, especially once she finds herself a husband. So I don't know if she feels like as an extension of that internalized racism, that she's angry about this child that she has from a previous relationship. And so she really tends to take it out on him. And, you know, at some point, the character is just such a little kid and doesn't understand completely, but is like understanding that their mom doesn't want them around in some way. And so the mom pours Jesse cereal, but the cereal is off. And so as a little kid, he just thinks his mom's trying to kill him. And so that's where the idea of rainbow milk, the title of rainbow milk comes from, is just this little kid looking down at the sugary cereal and thinking it's gonna kill them. And yeah, so that was just really sad to read, but I felt like the way it's written from like a kid's point of view, I felt was really effective and felt realistic, that the kid would make a correlation between the rancid milk, calling it rainbow milk, and the idea that their mom doesn't want them. So yeah, that was sad and powerful. Something that I didn't expect is Jesse's character, when they're exploring their sexuality, they're on their own. I didn't expect the character to have this idea that at some point they may decide to give up, or I guess suppress who they really are, and to go back to Jehovah's Witness. There's just a part of them that wants to, you know, reconnect with their community. So it took me a while. I think when I first read that, it felt a little bit jarring. But I think that was just maybe like a very sad dream, to know that they just like so badly want to be loved that they're willing to hide themselves once again. But that felt like a very vulnerable thought. And yeah, I think that I just have like, I'm in a lot of appreciation for the vulnerability of the character and what the author outlined. I almost feel like I don't have much to say other than that. But something else that I didn't see that I appreciated was just how some of the clients of Jesse are not all cruel. One of them is probably someone in their life that was the first person that ever truly showed him any like kindness. And it was a kindness of a client to kind of plant the seed in them that they deserve better, to respect themselves, to love themselves. And it was all through a gesture. And I thought that was really beautiful and sad that that's what it took in order for Jesse to feel like any type of acceptance. That it came with a stranger that had a healthy sense of self, a healthy level of acceptance, and also a healthy level of like boundary. And that was all wrapped up in someone that started out as a client but later on became friends. And I thought that was just like really beautiful. Eventually Jesse like goes into the restaurant industry. So even within the restaurant industry, we just see how tough it is. If you've ever seen the show The Bear, I was kind of thinking about that. But also when Jesse has to work the floor as a waiter, you also see like the microaggressions that Jesse has to deal with. And also something else that was prevalent in this book, I don't know, I feel like I sound like naive, but cocaine is really a whole other character in this book that I was not like expecting. It just seems like such a casual use, and I'm not even saying this in terms of like correlating like prostitution with drugs, but it just seems like this is something people do, and it almost I just kept thinking I don't know, it just seems so like so prevalent, I guess you could say. And I was just kind of I don't know, I don't want to say shocked by it, maybe that's the word. I was just surprised at how prevalent it was and how normal it is to the culture. But I don't know if that's, sorry, my cat's trying to get to my drink. How true is that to reality? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Something that really beautiful that happened to me while I was reading this, happened in the book, was that it's like 2002. Jesse has I want to say like a neighbor named Owen that he has a crush on. It's Christmas Day, and they have this really like bonding night together where they're just talking, having deep talks, getting to know each other. And Owen is someone who I think is still like grappling with their sexuality, is separated from their wife, and still figuring things out. But this really felt like a beautiful romantic night. And then the next chapter begins, and Owen's wife comes by and says that, tells Jesse that Owen's been in an accident. And all I kept thinking was, I need to stop reading this. Like, I had to take a break because I felt like if I read one more book where, because people are gay, the universe, like, punishes them with tragedy, I was going to be so upset. Like, I understand how important those books are to tell because that is a reality. But I need, not even just for me, but like for other people that read this, that have lived this, they probably just want to see themselves with a sense of hope. So that's how I felt about it. So then I continued to read. Thank goodness Owen didn't end up dead. But there's like a time jump. And we realize that Jesse and Owen, at some point, they get back together. They find their way back to each other, which I appreciated because I couldn't handle if Owen ended up dying. So I did like that they eventually end up back together. And I also think that because there's like a time jump, in my mind, that made sense because it's like, okay, well, they probably need time. They're two individuals that like met and then they need time to like grow and work on themselves before they're like ready for each other. And the fact that I could put those together made me feel like, oh, these characters feel very real, very lived in, that I start to make those connections about characters in a book. And I really, really love that. All right, so then the narrative kind of jumps back from Jesse and Owen not being together and then kind of explaining what kind of growth each character went through while they weren't together. Largely Jesse, right? Because they're the main character we're following. A little bit about Owen. But for Jesse, having that night with Owen had them become reignited with a passion for literature that they've always kind of had, but I feel like Owen like pushed them. So then Jesse starts writing as well, starts to create more of a community of friends that really are healthy and loving and positive. And that was really nice to experience. And also, what I really liked is how Jesse becomes reacquainted at some point, no longer being a prostitute, but with one of the clients that was actually showed him kindness. And I was actually like so happy to see that they became reacquainted with this person, which leads me to go back. Let's go back. When we first read the narrative of Norman in the 1950s, that section about Norman kind of ends with them kind of wondering why did they even leave Jamaica in the first place. They're just not in a good place emotionally because life is so tough. And then it jumps to Jesse. So what I thought, I ended up being right, I just wasn't sure for so long, was that Jesse would be one of the kids of Norman's kids. So basically Norman is a grandfather of Jesse. And that's because Jesse's dad's dad is Norman, if that makes any sense. So I was glad to find out that I was right. And there is a moment in the book, and I even bookmarked it, because Jesse is, when he was a prostitute, he was with his client, the one that was nice to him. I think the last name is like Thurston. And he stops and looks at a painting and is very like entranced by the painting. Something about it really touched them. And then later on you find that the connection is that that painting was actually painted by his father. So here he is looking at this painting not knowing that it's by a relative. Sorry. And that would connect him and this client that's actually like treat him like a human being and being nice to him and looking out for him, is in some way their father, which I thought was so beautiful, and that this client at one point bought this painting. And yeah, so like in a very roundabout way, at some point, Jesse gets reacquainted with some of his siblings, which I was glad to read, and which also drove the whole point home that his mom was also black. Because in the book I was so confused because there's so much internalized racism from the mom. I don't know. I was confused by that. But so it took like all that time to get towards the end of the book for me to figure out what was going on with the mother. Here you go, baby. Sorry, my cats like to play go fetch, basically. So it's like through reconnecting with family, having a found family, the character of Jesse finds their way back to making connections and doing the research and finding out who their real father was. Which brings us to the end of the book where Jesse eventually meets his aunt that's still alive. And so now not only do they have found family, they have like actual blood relatives, yeah, sweetie, that they didn't even know existed before. And ultimately they could no longer hold on to the idea of like potentially going on returning back to being a Jehovah's Witness. That idea is long gone, right? They have to let go of the idea of trying to make connections with their mother with internalized racism and seeking validation from like a white adoptive father, and just kind of come into their own and learn to just like really, they got to a point where they're like loving themselves and proud of themselves, and also proud of their father that they never knew, who also ended up being like, he's not Jesse's not sure, but he just kind of figures out that his dad was either gay or bisexual. And so there's this pride in Jesse finding a missing piece of themselves that I thought was really beautiful. And something else that didn't really connect for me, like I didn't make the connection, was something that I found out in an interview with the author. Because after I read this, I really needed to watch some interviews. And I'll include them below in the details. The author does state that Norman was also queer. I don't know if he was trying to say he was gay or bisexual. But that's like, there's like a minor interaction that the character Norman, his grandpa, has in the 1950s, where someone's kind of hitting on him, but nothing happens. So that's why I got confused. I just thought someone was hitting on him. I didn't necessarily think it was an indication that the character was queer as well. And so that's the only thing that I don't think came across in the books, if that's what the author wanted. I just wasn't sure about that. But what I do love is that the author has such a knack for character. Here, let's see if you can see. Oh my god, let me. Oh my god, this is a bad idea. That the author has such a knack for character that, yeah, these just feel very lived in, very loved, and you feel invested in what's going to happen to Jesse and in their life. And you do at the end find out what happened with Norman's family through Norman's kids retelling this information to Jesse. And it was just like, it was like beautiful, sad. I felt all the things when you read from a character that has spent so long trying to find love, connection, and family. And so I'm glad that it ended on a high note. I don't know if I could have handled I might have had to close books for a while, and I have so many other books to read. But if it didn't end on a hopeful note, I don't think I would have read for the rest of the month. I don't think I could take it right now. So yeah, sorry, I know I'm all over the place with this. I did really enjoy this book. Again, I think I already mentioned it, but if I didn't, this book jumps a lot in Jesse's timeline, and I don't necessarily think that was necessary. I still enjoyed the book. I just think that if Jesse's story was told in a linear narrative, I would have enjoyed it just as much. It would have still felt like I was on a ride, you know, like an emotional ride, if that makes any sense. So the timeline jumps, and I felt like maybe the author did that in order to build up a little bit more mystery or tension with what was actually gonna go on and how he got there. And I don't know. I just don't necessarily know if it was really needed, but I mean, I still read it. I still loved it. There is a moment in the book that Jesse writes about when he was a Jehovah's Witness, and the whole idea, I guess, is to go up to people's houses and get in and try to convert them. Chill out. And that the incident that brought him into someone's house ended up being the Twin Towers crashing during 9/11. And so that was kind of used as a plot device. And the author wrote very beautifully about how they go into this person's home. There's a tragedy going on that they're watching on their televisions from afar. And how the couple that he happened to walk into their home happened to be gay. And so he's seeing this tragedy happen on screen, but he's also seeing representation of something that he's been denying himself for so long. And how could this love exist that he has been told can't and is going to be something that would lead him to damnation. And I think that, like, how do I say? Those two contrasting things going on was, like, really what pushed him over. That really made him think that maybe he could have a life. Maybe everything that he's been taught could potentially be a lie. And I didn't really mind the author using that moment as a plot device in a way, because I didn't feel like it was gratuitous. And yeah, I get nervous sometimes when tragedies are used as a plot device. But nothing was written graphic or gratuitous is all I'd have to say. So I didn't mind it. But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that. And also, what was I else going to bring up? I'll read you a section. All right, so I'm going to read a passage from that section that I was saying that where 9/11 was used as a plot device. So as Jesse, he says, or he writes, "The way Carl and Abdul looked at each other, the way they held hands, Jesse found electrifying. They sat next to each other, watching something far more destructive to the world than their love. He left with a foretaste of Armageddon and wondered whom he would want to experience it with. These are the beginning of pangs of distress." And that was page 63. And I just like how the author wrote what a pivotal moment that was in the character's life. But then it also makes them kind of reevaluate all the other tragedies and why is it that those are allowed to exist by the God that they believe in, but for some reason Jesse isn't allowed to exist and accept themselves. So that was definitely like a planting of a seed of that idea. Also because I think you gotta be used in conversation with this book. So many of the things that stuck out to me were, for instance, how Brendan felt like there was almost felt like internalized racism where Brandon needed to be validated by white people, and that's what happened to Jesse's mother in Rainbow Milk, was just kind of taking that poison in. But also Brendan and Jesse both find themselves in positions because of a racist society needing to perform for others in order to be accepted and kept safe. These are both people that are queer and had to carve out boundaries, right? Brendan had to create boundaries and not really talk to their mom right now. Hopes that that will change. And then we have a character like Jesse who was shunned, and hopes, you know, for so long that that won't continue. And in Jesse's case, they let that go. They don't want to turn back and fight to be accepted. And so, yeah, so there's just a lot of parallels in some ways of just reconnecting with community and finding people that will love and accept you for who you are. And they're both so unfortunately relevant and continue to be. And so I would definitely recommend reading both of these books together. I would actually love to see both these authors have an author chat together. Something else, oh, I think I already mentioned it, but in Rainbow Milk, hold on, my cat's sleeping on my notes, is that there's so much music that's mentioned. I'm just going to list it off to you. Let me see. So for Norman's chapters for music, they mentioned Cliff Richards, Living Doll, Wagner, Tchaikovsky, something else that's called Mento Song. I don't think I'm saying that right. And then they mention Gatsby and Of Mice and Men, Elvis, Johnny Cash, Sherlock Holmes, Edgar Allan Poe. And then we switch to Jesse's point of view for the rest of the book. And they talk about books like The Watchtower, Awake, The Greatest Man That Ever Lived, Giovanni's Room, which I got excited when I read Giovanni's Room. And there's also a ton of music. And I have terrible writing, so I don't know if I could even read what I was writing. Neptunes, Jay-Z, Notorious B.I.G., Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Robert Flack, I think. Oh, and then the Fugees. And there's also, let me see what else. There's another book reference, Another Country by Baldwin, which I think I have on my shelf, so I will be reading that later today. Yeah, I have it there. I have Another Country, Native Son, The Devil, something, I can't read. I have a couple of Baldwin books on my shelf that I'm going to be reading probably towards the end of the year. And then there's more music references to, I think it's So Solid. I gotta write better. Sugar Babes, Destiny's Child, Damage, Mystique, Anita Baker, Swing Out Sister, Breakout. And there's a movie reference to Steve McQueen's Bear. I haven't seen that yet. I think it's gonna be a graphic one. Just like the references alone, it's gonna be a graphic one. So I'm gonna have to hold on tight and watch that. And then there's more music references like Aaliyah, Beyonce, Joy Division, Mary J. Blige, Billie Holiday. Passages of Joy is a book reference. And Angela Carter and Iris Murdoch are also book references, but I'm not familiar with those. And I think that's it. Yeah. So I definitely want to look on my Spotify to see if anybody's made a playlist for Rainbow Milk. But yeah, if you've read this book, let me know your thoughts. If you have somehow gotten all the way through this video, Thank you so much. Please subscribe, like, share, comment below. I hate saying all that stuff all over and over again because it sounds so robotic and empty, but it really does help to get my videos out to other people, into the algorithm. My cat has officially fallen asleep on me. But yeah, this is the end. This is the end for us. I was going to show you the next two books I'm going to read, but I can't reach them because of my cat. So I am going to be reading two books that I'm going to do the same thing for, where I'm going to release one video because they are also in conversation together. And that is The Color Purple, and that's the other one I can't see, but I think it's called Burnt Sugar. I'll write below if it's correct, by the author Blitz something. I can't remember his last name. I want to read those together because Blitz is the one who adapted The Color Purple into a musical, the theater and movie musical adaptation. I originally saw Blitz on an interview with Trevor Noah when Trevor Noah was on The Daily Show, and there's plenty of books on my shelf that I've read because Trevor Noah interviewed those particular authors. Or I have the books on my shelf still. And so time has come and gone. I wanted to read these two books together before the movie came out. And it didn't happen. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, and I'm pretty sure it's because I haven't turned this camera off because of my cat. So yeah, thank you for watching. I love you all. I'll talk to you later. Bye.